Okay, well, let's begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ross Anderson, and I work at Metrolinx. I'm a senior advisor on the community engagement team for the Ontario Line Subway project. I would like to warmly welcome everybody to this evening's meeting, where we will discuss ongoing construction activities in the Queen and Yonge area. This site at Queen and Yonge, around Bay Street and Victoria Street, will be the future home of the Queen Station rather, for the future Ontario Line subway project. Next slide, please. But before we begin, let us take a moment to acknowledge that we are on lands that have been and continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, as immigrants, or involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade in this generation or in generations past. We acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonization, and we need to work towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on territories and lands covered by many treaties that affirm and value the rights of Indigenous communities, nations, and peoples. We understand the importance of working towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. At Metrolinx, we will conduct business in a manner that is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Next slide, please. Well, it's my pleasure to be the moderator for this evening's meeting. And my goal for this meeting is to keep it on time and to make sure all of your questions are answered to the best of our ability. Tonight's meeting is being recorded, and it will be made available on the Metrolinx YouTube page. There's also a closed caption feature that you're able to enable on your end. This evening, I will be joined by my colleagues from the Metrolinx side and the construction team, as you see on the screen here. Beginning with James Francis, you can see his video is on. Hi, James. James is a senior manager for the Subway Sponsor Program at Metrolinx. And then we have Hugo. Hugo, thanks for joining us. And Hugo and Aga both work for OTG. And we'll talk a little bit more about OTG and who they are shortly. But this is who you'll be hearing speak tonight. So thank you all for joining. And I'd just like to warmly also welcome any elected officials who have registered for this evening's event. I do believe I saw some staff from MP Kristen Wong-Tam's office, and any other staff or elected officials who have joined tonight. Thank you for taking this time out of your evening to learn about piling and construction in the Ontario Line Queen Station. Next slide, please. So tonight's agenda will consist of a number of topics in which we'll discuss a little bit about the Ontario Line. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is a great opportunity to learn about it, and what progress has been made to date. We're going to talk a little bit about not what has only happened, but what is going to happen, and talk about what we can expect in the future. Piling. Piling is what is happening next at the Queen and Bay site, and that will be the primary focus of this evening's meeting. And we're also going to take some time to reduce impacts and, of course, question and answer and discussion, how we can reduce impacts, and acknowledging any questions you might have and answering them. Just on the right of your screen here, there's some meeting guidelines. We just want to create this to be a respectful place and for you and us. And we want to make sure we can answer as many questions as we can. So if you can keep them brief, that would be great. And keep them maybe one follow-up as well. If you have a burning desire to ask another question, we'll try to get to you, but we want to make sure everybody has a fair share at asking questions. And let's go to the next slide, please. So in advance of tonight's meeting, several questions have been received using a feature called Slido. And this is where people can submit questions ahead of the meeting, and we're able to compile questions and prepare answers. And this is one way we are able to take questions and answer them at this evening's meeting. It's not the only way, though. There's going to be an opportunity at the end of the meeting to raise your digital hand and unmute your microphone, where you can actually speak to the constructor, to the project engineer, and ask them your question directly. In order to do this, I'm going to have to enable your mic. So you won't be able to do this until the end of the presentation, where your microphones will then be enabled. And what I will do is I will enable your microphone. You hover your mouse over the microphone icon, as you see on the right here, and then you are able to speak. And I will say, Bill, speak. Bill, can you just answer your ask your question rather? Excuse me. And there will also be an opportunity to ask your question in the chat function as well. That will be enabled only toward the end of the meeting. And we'll get to your questions as well. So those three ways, the Slido, the chat, and the microphone are all ways to ask your question. Next slide, please. And you can also scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you have a question you'd like to ask, just go ahead and scan it or enter the code you see here on the left hand of your screen at the slido.com website, and it'll be fairly easy to ask a question, and we'll try to get to it through the meeting as well. Next slide, please. All right, about the Ontario Line. Next slide, please. Well, you've probably heard of it. The Ontario Line is a new rapid transit project being built in the city of Toronto. The Ontario Line is actually designed to bring relief to the existing transit infrastructure in the city. So that includes streetcars, subways, a lot of the cars that we see on the road. And the way the Ontario Line is designed is to bring people closer to their destinations and also to bring transit to areas of the city that might be a bit underserved in transit as it is. So as you can see here on the left, the pink area on the alignment is where we expect the Ontario Line to actually be above ground, and the blue area is where it will travel underground. Beginning in Exhibition in the west, it will begin it will share the rail corridor with GO Transit, and then it will go underground. This is where the portal, as we call it, the train will go underground through King Bathurst all the way to Corktown, and exactly with Queen as well. And then it'll come out of the underground and continue above ground until passing through the Pape area, returning underground until coming to the north area of Toronto, ending at the Science Centre, as we currently know it as being. The Ontario Line is also known to be a network of transit options. So as you can see with Osgoode and Queen, they're both considered interchange stations. What's an interchange station? An interchange station is where you can actually get off the Ontario Line and transfer onto the TTC subway, that being. And then you can continue on your destination to Union Station, perhaps, Yonge and Bloor, maybe Yonge and Eglinton, where you catch the Eglinton Crosstown and you can head east or west. Or you can head to Exhibition as well on the Ontario Line and catch a GO train. The way it was designed was to make these as easy as possible and to take more cars off the road. Another interesting fact about the Ontario Line is that not only is it 15.6 kilometers long and there's going to be 15 stations, but it's going to be built under the existing transit infrastructure. So it will be built underneath the TTC as it currently stands, and there will be very few, if any, disruptions to the TTC service. So yes, the Ontario Line will be underneath the current subway infrastructure. Next slide, please. And who is building the Ontario Line? Well, Ontario Transit Group. Ontario Transit Group, or OTG, as you might hear us refer to them as, is a joint venture between a company called Ferrovial Construction and Vinci Construction. They're procured to deliver the southern portion of the Ontario Line project, and sometimes we refer to as the South Civils. OTG will be responsible for building and designing the stations for the Ontario Line, and building the tunnels as well in the southern alignment. So you can see here in the highlighted area in the yellow part between Exhibition and Corktown, this is where OTG will be working. The cool thing about the Ontario Line, it's going to be divvied up into many different contracts. So not only will there be OTG, but there's several others depending on where you are on the Ontario Line. So there's going to be a contract for the bridges, there's another contract for the Don Yard, and so on and so forth. Just to talk a little bit more about OTG here, there's going to be one above ground station to be integrated with the GO Transit Exhibition station, as I had mentioned, 4 new underground stations, and 2 underground stations to be integrated with the TTC network, as I had said earlier, with Osgoode and Queen. Next slide, please. With that said, I'd like to hand the conversation over to James Francis from the Metrolink Sponsors Office to tell us a little bit about Queen Station.
Great, thanks so much, Ross. So the Ontario Line Queen Station, it's as Ross mentioned, it's one of the 7 stations that Ontario Transit Group is working to deliver. And Queen Station is anticipated to be one of the busiest stations on the Ontario line. And as Ross mentioned, it will integrate with the existing TTC Line 1 Queen Station. It will make use of the existing TTC Line 1 Queen Station entrances with some modifications to the existing station entrance on the southwest corner of Yonge and Queen, where we'll be adding a wider staircase and also adding an elevator to accommodate our anticipated passenger volumes. Also, as Ross mentioned, Queen Station for Ontario Line will be below the existing TTC Line 1 Queen Station, and will connect with that station at concourse level, and then it will extend underground west to James Street and east to Victoria Street, as shown in the black outline on the image on this slide. Next slide, please. And so we've been making great progress preparing the station area for piling, which is the focus of the remainder of the discussion. Over the past year, we've been working with utility providers in this area to relocate a whole host of utilities, including water mains, storm sewers, combined sewers, telecommunications utilities, and also natural gas infrastructure out of the Ontario Line station area, so that we have a clear zone for construction. So a clear zone for piling and excavation and station construction. We've also been working to modify the basement of the adjacent Hudson's Bay building to remove what was a conflict between the basement of that building, which used to extend under Queen Street, and the future Ontario Line Queen Street station. And we're now ready to go. We're now ready to proceed with our next phases of construction, including piling. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Hugo for the next slide.
Thank you, James. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the look ahead of the construction activities that will happen throughout 2024. We, OTG, have just mobilized on the west part of Queen at the start of April. And a few days ago, we mobilized into the east part of Queen between Yonge and Victoria. So we are right now busy with enabling activities like fencing installation and preparation of the surfaces so that we can start with the piling activities as soon as we can. These piling activities, both on the east and on the west, will start towards the end of this month, start of June, and they will extend all the way up to December 2024. And then it will be in 2025 when we start with the excavation activities. We will start with the excavation of the two shafts, both on the east and on the west of Yonge. And those excavations will reach up to a level that is approximately 42 meters below the current street level. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if we are going to focus on drilling in the next slide, thank you. I can show you how piling work. So piling is a foundation technique used to construct underground structural support systems. So basically, we are going to build a concrete wall underground that will allow us to create the excavation of the shafts. So the piles ensure the stability and the support of the surrounding infrastructures, and this includes buildings, but also utilities and other services. And will allow us to create that excavation to reach the bottom of the shafts, maintaining the integrity of the infrastructure that surrounds the future station. So the technique that has been chosen in the design of Queen Station is a secant pile wall. So here we will have each pile that will overlap the adjacent piles and will create a wall or a concrete structure that will provide an adequate level of water tightness to be able to proceed with the follow-on construction activities after the excavation has been finished. Some of these piles are reinforced with steel beams that will provide the stiffness to the wall, and all of this is required in advance of the start of any excavation. Next slide, please. Right, so to install the piles, we need a piling rig, obviously, and the piles in Queen, they are around 18 meters deep, This is the distance from the surface level of the street up to the rock bed. They are all 1 meter in diameter, and they follow the perimeter of both shafts, the one on the west and the one on the east. The west shaft is around 75 meters long, and the one on the east is around 55. So this second pile wall has primary piles, which are also called filler piles, and secondary piles, which are also called reinforced piles. The filler piles are not reinforced, and they are the piles that are beaten or overlapped by the secondary piles, which are the ones that have the reinforcement. In this case, it's not a reinforcement cage, it's a steel beam. To ensure the required tolerances are achieved, in advance of the start of piling, we will construct a guide wall, which is, you can see on the picture on the right, bottom right side. You can see a picture showing the setup so the guide wall can be constructed, and this will allow us to ensure that the piles are located in the right location with the right accuracy, and also that the verticality of the piles that is required is achieved. Next slide, thank you. So in terms of schedule, as I said before, we are planning to start towards the end of this month, the start of June, and the piling will take place throughout the rest of the year up to December 24. We will primarily conduct these activities on day shift between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., although there will be certain logistic requirements that will require that we move these activities on nights, mainly to accommodate certain pinch points around the sidewalks in order to minimize the disruption to the traffic and to the pedestrians around the station. Next slide. Thank you. So following on from what I was saying before, once the piles are finished, we will build a capping beam, which is a concrete beam that joins all the piles together. And then we will proceed with the excavation, and something similar to what you see on the screen right now will be observed in Queen. The only thing is that it will be much deeper. We will reach, as I said before, 42 meters in depth. And as we progress with the excavation at certain levels defined by our structural assessment, we will have to install struts, which are these white steel beams that you can see on the screen. Next slide. So in terms of expectations from equipment and the like, we are going to have piling rigs, loaders and trucks to be able to take away the material that we are going to excavate out of the ground, and then we will have concrete trucks delivering the concrete, and also trucks delivering the steel beams and cranes to offload them. These vehicles, trucks, will enter and leave the site several times a day, and they will follow all a specified route that has been defined in order, with the objective to minimize the impact on the local traffic. At each entrance, we will have designated people or flag persons that will ensure that the interface between the pedestrians and the vehicles is managed and the safety is controlled. And at the main junctions in Bay, Yonge, and Victoria, we will have paid duty officers as well. Next slide. Right, and on the screen you can see the site traffic and the pedestrian flows around the station. We are not yet in this configuration, as we are transitioning from the early work contractors that are still present in certain areas of the site to the OTG full site. But once we are able to occupy the whole footprint, what you will see is that we will more or less maintain the same concept that has been followed so far, where Queen Street West between Bay and Yonge, and then East between Yonge and Victoria will be closed. James Street will also be closed between Queen Street West and Albert Street. And the southbound curb lane of Victoria Street will be partially closed to allow for vehicles to enter the east shaft from Victory. Right, so we'll pass this over to Aga now, who will continue with the presentation.
Good evening, it's Aga Szczotka, Environmental Manager for OTG. I'm here to talk about how we are going to reduce those impacts on you as the community. So we've got air quality monitoring in place to track dust from construction activities, is a live monitoring. So we know through this monitoring how well we are performing. We have also, wherever possible, site hoarding in place to reduce noise. We also use white noise backup alarms in machinery like loaders and trucks. We also, whenever possible, we would install one-way system to reduce the need for use for trucks to reverse and use those backup alarms. And we also provide street sweepers when the roads need cleaning to reduce soil tracking on Toronto roads and streets. Next slide, please. This is an example of a typical noise monitor. We install noise and vibration monitors where we work to again do live monitoring to look if we are close to the agreed thresholds and to keep an eye if we need to introduce different mitigation measures. So just to make sure that impact from the construction is minimized as far as possible. Next slide, please.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Hugo and Aga and James Francis. And just want to take a moment to acknowledge that was a lot of information at once for you who have joined the presentation. And there's a chance you have questions or some thoughts. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to ask my colleagues to enable the chat. I'm going to ask us to go to the next slide as well. The next slide will just be a bit of a reminder of how we can operate the chat function and the Q&A portion. Now that the chat function is enabled, I encourage you to raise your digital hand, and this will be an opportunity to ask questions, not only based on what you just heard, but if you have any questions about the construction in general, we're here to answer those questions. If you want to take a few moments to think about what to ask, we do have a number of questions lined up from Slido, and I'd be happy to begin speaking to those questions. But please raise your hand or use the chat function should you have any questions. So I actually printed this out. So the first question I have from Slido is, will the subway be open in sections as they are completed? The short answer is no, it won't. The subway is going to all be released, open at the same time, and that's in 2031. The reason for that is because the Ontario line is being delivered in multiple projects, as I had mentioned earlier. So just because one station is complete doesn't mean the line is ready to operate, and it still needs to do so in tandem with the TTC, as remember those interchange stations I had mentioned. So they won't be able to have half of the Ontario line running while the other half is still under construction. And we want to have an integrated start time, an integrated start date. But we've made a lot of progress so far, and we're looking forward to a 2031 service date. Wolf, I believe that is a raised hand, is it? So I'm going to go into the chat here and try to find your name. Wolf, I've allowed your microphone. If you'd like to ask your question, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Allison, can you go back one slide, please? Oh, perfect. Yeah, this is where we need to be. Wolf, are you having some trouble unmuting yourself? Your microphone is enabled. Okay, I see your question here is in the chat. So the question is about accessibility. And Wolf asks about how much easier will it be to get around using a wheelchair at this Queen Station? I think that's a great question, and I think accessibility is a very important component of this project. I may look to James to answer this, and he's asking about all stations. Thank you for that, Wolf. So James, are you able to provide an answer for that?
Absolutely, yes. So we are designing and building all of our stations to be fully accessible. So we have elevator access to stations, multiple elevators, and in particular at Queen Station, we are adding an additional elevator, which will provide access not only to Ontario Line, but also to the existing TTC Line 1 Queen Station. So we're enhancing accessibility to the existing network as well.
Great, thank you so much for that, James. And I'm going to go to another question in the chat, and I'm just going to go as I see them come in. So next in line would be from Ron. And Ron asks, will there be a direct connection to the path system to the south? Example, the mall under the Four Seasons. Yes, actually, in fact, the Queen Station is the only station along the Ontario line that will have access to the path. And it will be using the existing path access that you see the Eaton Center and Queen Station using. So it's not like a new access point will be built for the path, but you will be able to connect to the path via the existing access points that are available, at which point you can continue on your journey, whether it be to Union Station and the Four Seasons or just the path in general. Next question here, Divyani Singh. Divyani asks, I wanted to understand there would be a lot of people working on this project. Would they be needing a hotel booking to be done for them? I'm sure they would be needing that. Whom should I be contacting for the same? So I'm trying to understand the question, and I just want to make sure it's clear. But I believe the question that's being asked is, given the number of people who are working on the project, whether they would need to have accommodation overnight in the city. I'm going to lean on James one more time too, and I could probably help you out with this. But if I were to start, we hire a lot of local jobs here where people do commute to work, just like a lot of us do. However, I'm sure there are times where construction workers and people that work in offices for Metrolinx will have to take accommodation at surrounding hotels. But I can't say for certain. I'm sure there will be, though.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, just to add to that, we do very much look to procure locally and have local folks working. But if there is an opportunity here, feel free to reach out to us. I don't think our contact info is on this slide, but it's on one of the other ones. We have regularly monitored email address and phone number. So please do feel free to reach out, and happy to receive further information.
Thank you, James. And I actually have another one from Wolf for you. And the question's about safety. Wolf asks if this station or the Ontario Line stations in general are going to be safer than the current stations. And I'm assuming you're referring to the current stations in the city, the current subway stations, or some of the current GO stations. So the question is about pedestrian safety, perhaps security in the area.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the aspects that we think about in terms of designing stations and the spaces is there are principles around safety, and one of the, I'd say, kind of stepwise improvements that we're able to offer with the Ontario Line in terms of safety for all of our customers is the introduction of platform edge doors. And so because Ontario Line trains will be automated, they'll be stopping at a highly consistent location every time along the platforms. And that allows us to have platform edge doors. So there will be transparent barriers along the platform edge. So where say at current TTC and GO stations, there's a yellow strip. At the edge of that strip, closest to the trains, there will be transparent barriers with doors that will open in sync with the doors of the train, so that it's only possible to enter the space that the train is in when the train is exactly in that location. So I think that really provides a safety enhancement for all of our passengers, and something that we're really happy to offer as part of the kind of contemporary technology available to us at this time.
Great. Thank you so much for that, James. And thank you for that question, Wolf. Fred here has a comment saying it's more of a comment. There's no answer required, but the gentleman at the Thorncliffe Park Mall is awesome to talk to. He's enthusiastic and very knowledgeable. Thank you so much for that, Fred. Really appreciate the compliment. Anthony asks, where will the excavated material be placed once removed, and will it be hauled away, and to what location? I'm going to lean on Hugo from OTG. Hugo, I think the question is, what happens to all the muck and to all the dirt once we pull it out of the ground?
Right. So it really depends on the results that we get from the testing. We have a preliminary understanding on the quality of the ground and the contaminants that will be in the ground as excavated. So depending on, we will have to go through a testing regime that is already defined. And based on the results, the material will be taken to different pre-approved tip places, depending if the material can be reused, for example, in agricultural or industrial lands, or if the material needs to be treated. So it really depends on what we find when we start with the excavation.
Hey, thank you so much for that response. And Anthony, or Andrew rather, Pina, has another question here. Andrew asks, while the estimated time to open is 2031, is there an estimated earlier date for street level construction? Yeah, I think we can speak to that. Essentially, the street level construction, can we speak to when we expect this piling to begin, Hugo? And I think you might have mentioned it earlier, but perhaps just reiterate it once again for us.
Yeah, so in terms of street level construction, or for how long we OTG will be seen at street level, as I said before, piling will start towards the end of the month, start of June. And then that will be followed by the excavation of the shafts, and then the construction of the concrete structures inside the shafts, together with excavation of the caverns, the main tunnels that join both shafts. We are targeting the reinstatement of Queen Street and reopen to traffic towards the end of 27, early 28. So in terms of works taking place at surface, the expectation should be for this to last around 4.5 years, 4 years.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Hugo. And again, the Queen Street area that you see that's closed today will reopen at the end of 2027, maybe early 2028. And that's what we're working toward. The station itself is going to be underground as well. So there's not going to be an above ground station. There's going to be an entrance. But then when you go underground via elevator or escalator, then you'll get to the station, which is going to be underground Queen Street, essentially, underground the existing TTC station. And this is an excellent question, I see, and a good segue. Is this project independent of the TTC? James.
So we are absolutely working very closely with the TTC as we work to build the system. It will provide seamless integration with TTC Line 1. And so it will operate as one overall transit system, but it is Metrolinx leading the development and the construction of Ontario Line. And I did just want to also add a little bit more to the previous response in terms of timing of surface construction and take the opportunity to highlight that we are using a relatively new in Toronto method of construction here for transit, which is called sequential excavation method, or effectively kind of an underground mining type of approach. And that allows us to be less impactful at street level while we continue to work. As Hugo mentioned, the station is going, it's about 40 meters underground. So we do have, a fair amount of work to do underground, but we're able to continue our underground works while not continuing to impact at surface level, so that things at the surface will be can be kind of back to normal as we continue to progress station construction underground. So really happy to be making use of this less impactful method, and we're using that not only here, but it's certainly an aspect of minimizing our overall impacts as we build Queen Station.
Okay, thank you so much. And I believe I had responded to a question in the chat and I had misread it. The streetcar on Queen Street, this person asks when it will be resuming operations. And we've made a lot of progress with it, and so has the TTC and the city, working on the track infrastructure needed to accommodate the new streetcar detour while Metrolinx continues its construction on Queen Street. And that should be ready and in operation by the end of this summer. So stay tuned for that. And there's another question I also wanted to ask, and this is an interesting question, a bit historical, but I'm going to ask James to answer this one too. The question we received on Slido, the question is, how will Lower Queen be integrated? Will there be a section detailing the history of Lower Queen? James, what is Lower Queen? What's significant about Lower Queen, and how are we going to integrate it into the Ontario line?
Thanks. This is a great question. So for those who may not know Lower Queen, it's a roughed-in streetcar stop that was put in when Line 1 was initially built, with a concept that perhaps there would be something like what's now Ontario Line, running east-west along Queen Street. So it's a roughed-in chamber, roughed-in streetcar stop underneath that existing TTC Line 1 station. And for those who may have walked underneath the Line 1 track, so you can walk underneath to transfer platforms from northbound to southbound, or vice versa. You go underneath the tracks and you walk through a corridor to the south of that existing passenger walkway or corridor. That's where Lower Queen is, that roughed-in streetcar stop. And we're able to take advantage of that work done, back in the early 1950s, to build Lower Queen, and we're incorporating that space into the Ontario Line concourse level. So we'll be modifying that structure and then expanding it to the east and to the west as part of Ontario Line. So it's really kind of a neat piece of Toronto transit history, and we're able to kind of bring it to life in a modern way as part of Ontario Line.
Fascinating. Thank you for that answer, James. Wolf had a question about fares and how the fare change. I believe the question was, I'm trying to find it here in the chat, but essentially it's going to be an integrated system. So what that means, Wolf, is that if you get off the TTC and you are still in the window, the transfer period in which you could hop onto a streetcar or hop onto the Ontario Line, for example, that is the way we anticipate the fare integration to work. So you're not going to have to pay when you get off the TTC to hop onto an Ontario Line subway or hop onto a streetcar. We want to make it as seamless as possible for the end transit user. I hope that helps answer your question. Hugo, I have a question for you. Came in from Slido, and the question is about piling. So the question is, will work be conducted during the day or at night?
Right. So for piling, work will predominantly take place on days. However, there are certain locations or areas of the shafts that will need to be conducted throughout the night, because we will be impacting the sidewalks for the duration of those walks. And in order to mitigate the impact onto the pedestrians, we will move ad hoc those activities to night shift.
Hey, thank you so much for that question. There was another question that had come in about accessing line 1 from the Ontario Line station. Almira, I don't know if you're able to speak to this, or perhaps someone else from the team who's on the call might be able to address this, but how do we expect people who use the Ontario Line be able to get off that subway and hop onto another subway? What would that look like?
So I'm happy to speak to this. Mira, please feel free to augment. So in terms of the transfers, we've looked at how we can do this as seamlessly as possible with all of the existing underground infrastructure that in this kind of very built up part of downtown. And folks who've been watching construction in this area know that we've been working quite diligently for many months now to relocate utilities in the area to give us the space that we need to do our piling and create our entry points for the future station excavation. And part of thinking about what's there and how do we integrate, there are some constraints. So in terms of transferring, so as I mentioned, in terms of talking about Lower Queen, there's an existing kind of an underpass between the northbound and southbound platforms for line 1. If you think about the northbound platform for line 1 at Queen Station, from that platform, you'll be able to walk east and get into the Ontario Line portion of the station, which will then be below ground. So there will be elevators and stairs and escalators to get down to Ontario Line platform level. From the southbound line 1 Queen Station, there's the existing set of stairs up towards the Eaton Center and the Hudson Bay building. And so if you think about at the top of that flight of stairs, there's currently, if you were to look straight ahead, there's a wall. The plan is to have that area then be the entrance into another entrance into the Ontario Line station area from TTC platform level. So from there, you would then head down to the Ontario Line platforms.
Well said. Thank you, James. Almira, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Almira is nodding her head.
Yeah, he covered everything. Thanks, James.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you both. I'm going to take another Slido question. And the question is, at the Queen site, what can nearby residents do to report and get real-time actions on excessive noise during night work, instead of waiting until the next day? I was just informed that the sites are instructed to keep decibel levels under 80 decibels and that there is noise monitoring, but the site keeps breaking this rule. So I'm going to repeat the question, and I think what the question's asking is, how can people report complaints when there are noise exceedances, in particular at night? This person asking the question was informed that 80 decibels was the max limit, but the site is not adhering to those rules. I'm going to look to my colleagues at OCG, and perhaps Aga might be able to speak to this.
Hello. So as I mentioned before in the presentation, we've got noise monitors deployed at our works. If there is an exceedance, our team receives an alarm, which we are able then investigate and look into the cause. As a resident, if you wish to express your concern, you can connect with Metrolinx 24/7. Do we have details here? Or yeah, I think at the end of the presentation, we'll have details how to connect with our Metrolinx colleagues.
Great. Okay. I really hope that helps answer the question. If I can just expand on that, is we do acknowledge that sometimes there are exceedances, and it happens, and it's the reality sometimes of construction sites. But what's interesting in particular about this site is that there's active noise monitoring, and when there is an exceedance, the project manager rather would get a notification that goes directly to them, and they would investigate what caused the exceedance. Sometimes it is our work, sometimes it could be a fire truck. It's whatever the microphone might pick up. Either way, it's encouraged that you do contact us on the 24/7 actively monitored Ontario Line community engagement number. We try to avoid noise at night wherever possible because we want to make sure people are able to get a good night's sleep. So if you've experienced this, I just want to apologize, and please reach out to us, and you can reach out to me directly, and we'll try to come to a resolve for you as soon as we're able. Thank you for that question, and thank you, Aga. There was another question that came in on Slido about fencing. And the question on fencing is, there's fencing on the east side from Victoria to Yonge. Will that eventually be something sturdier that offers a little bit more soundproofing than what currently exists? Perhaps Aga might be able to speak to that, or perhaps someone from our team can talk a little bit about the acoustic attenuation that hoarding offers.
Yeah, we install hoarding noise blankets wherever possible. We look at our receptors, we look what impact we can cause, and then we come up with this mitigation. In this case, with Queen Station, I may ask Hugo to support that answer because we all work together and it's through planning when we come up with the solution on further mitigation measures.
Actually, for Queen East, there will be 2 phases of fencing. That's what we have planned at the moment. So the current fast fence or the mesh that you see will be replaced by the plywood hoarding that Aga was describing before as we take possession of the area. And then once the piles are complete, towards the end of this year or early next year, the plan is to install an acoustic enclosure that will allow for further mitigation in that area, which is especially sensitive due to the nearby residents and the hospital, St. Michael's Hospital, which is just across the road.
Hey, thank you so much for that. And again, the hoarding by nature, you'll see it at other sites. It's this tall, big wall, it looks like, and it's built of plywood. And again, by nature, it offers a degree of soundproofing as well. So currently what you see, that mesh, is just to protect pedestrians and other people from dust, and that's really all it does. But once the hoarding is up, it'll be quieter. It'll be noticeably quieter when construction is active. I'm just looking through the chat now, recognizing there is only 9 minutes left of the presentation, but I do want to make sure everybody is seen in the chat. The question is, why do half of your fences have bumpers on the metal, yet others do not? Well, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe do you mean by what is holding the fence in place? Can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about your question? I'm having trouble understanding. In the meantime, there's another question I see here about community art, and I think it does relate to hoarding. And the question here is, bear with me, when will community art be spoken about in hoarding? So Metrolinx is actively considering community art because we do want to make these hoardings look nice. We want it to be beautiful. We acknowledge that this area is a tourist destination, and we do want to work with the community and folks like you to make sure that, you know, the community is properly reflected onto the hoarding to some degree. When people visit, they'll able to see a reflection of the community on the hoarding. Our partners at Ontario Transit Group, OTG, will be issuing a survey, and there's going to be other form methods where we'll work with the BIAs. There's a financial district BIA and the Downtown Yonge BIA, where there are meetings that are scheduled at a cadence in which these conversations can happen. if you have suggestions of what you'd like to see on the hoarding, I certainly encourage you to email those suggestions to us. Perhaps you know of a great local artist, or you have a great idea of what should be reflected rather on the hoarding. You know, the community's voice will be the directive on the reflection of the panel artwork, and survey results will be shared online. There might be 8 questions, for example, that says, what would you like to see reflected on the hoarding, or what's most important to you about this area? And you know, we want to have a fair practice through each station. So this is going to be replicated at Moss Park and at Corktown and at King Bathurst. And we just want to make sure that each community, acknowledging that each are unique and diverse in its own way, have hoarding and some sense of community artwork that reflects the area in which it stands. Back to Wolf's question about the bumpers and the metal. So the metal that holds the fencing in the same spots as bumpers that are safe for wheelchairs, keep use from popping tires, and other spots there are no bumpers. Can somebody from my team speak to that? Elmira or James, perhaps, when we talk about these bumpers on the fencing?
I'm assuming that it's about the covers for the fence on the bottom side. So we need to provide those for all the fencing. If that is missing, we will look into that. That is just for avoiding any tripping hazard. So I don't know, Hugo, if you want to add anything.
Sorry, I was muted. As I said before, we are taking over from previous contractors, and as the fencing gets replaced, you will see that some of those fences with no bumpers will disappear, and the ones with the bumpers are the ones that we have been installing recently. So it's just a matter of waiting for the transition to be complete.
Hey, great. Thank you so much. And Wolf, I hope this helps answer your question. Matthew, he asks, when are we going to see progress on the Ontario line, or is it already underway? Matthew, the Ontario line construction is already underway. If you see Queen Street currently, I know it looks like it's just closed down right now, which it is, but we've actually delivered the piling rig, which is going to install the piles in order to begin this first stage of real construction for the Ontario line. Everything that's been done to date in the Queen Street area is what we considered advanced works. They're moving all these utilities underground to make room for us to build the actual Ontario line, the station, and to begin digging. So this is a quite symbolic start for station on the Ontario line at Queen Station. And if you travel to some of the other areas in the city where the Ontario line's built, you'll notice that demolitions have been done in different areas like King and Bathurst and the southern station entrance at Osgoode Hall. And you'll be able to know it's us because there's messaging on the hoarding that says the Ontario line in bright pink and yellow letters. So I definitely encourage you to go check out some of these areas, and there's a lot of interesting stuff to see. There's another question I wanted to get to, and I know we don't have much time left, but the question was, will Line 1 need to be shut down on the weekends? James, can you tell us if Line 1 will be shut down on the weekends while Metrolinx is doing Ontario line construction?
So we do anticipate a need for some selective coordinated closures with TTC, you know, very minor, and that's to really kind of handle those interfacing areas. So we're working closely with TTC on those, and any of those minor closures, which would be, you know, we have a fair amount of work to do until we're there. We'll be providing any updates on those in future meetings. So stay tuned. But based on how we're building our station, we anticipate you know, very minor disruptions to Line 1, and the TTC service will be operating as usual for the vast majority of the construction period.
Great. Thank you so much for that, James. And yes, if we do anticipate any disruptions to the existing TTC, we will definitely make sure commuters are notified well in advance. There's 3 minutes left, and I just want to take a moment to go through the remaining slides we have in this presentation. So can we go to the next slide, please? Community engagement. So this is what we're doing tonight. We are doing community engagement. I work in community engagement, and a number of my colleagues who are on this call also work in our offices. We have 2 community engagement offices. We have one at the East York Town Center. This is like the Thorncliffe Park Mall somebody had referenced earlier in the meeting. And then we have another office in Leslieville. This is at 770 Queen Street East. Both community offices are actively open from Monday to Fridays from 9 to 5. And we encourage you to come by and say hi to us or ask your questions in person. If not, we do have an Ontario Line Metrolinx email that you can submit your questions to, or give us a call. There's no bad questions, and we want to be here to help people understand what kind of construction is happening. Whether it's a complaint or it's just an inquiry, we encourage you to contact us. On the right here, there's a QR code which will take you to our e-newsletter. This is a weekly newsletter. It's published on Mondays, and it talks a little bit about the highlights of the Ontario Line. What are some of the milestones to date, or what kind of progress have we made this week? Different interesting tidbits, some historic elements that we want to share with the public. And this is all really interesting stuff. So I definitely encourage you to sign up for our e-newsletter. And if you really are interested, give us a follow on social media. We do have a lot of good content that is posted on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So I definitely encourage you to check some of that stuff out. You get a lot of photos that you can't really see just from outside, a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff. So give that a shot. Let's see the next slide, please. Perhaps another slide. All right, well, I guess this takes us to the end of our presentation with 1 minute to spare. And I just want to thank everybody again. I want to thank the speakers at tonight, and hope everybody has a safe evening and safe rest of your week. Take care now. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.